Hi, my name is Peter Wooding, and thank you for joining us. This is the second session of our whole week of automotive EV topics. And it's my pleasure today to have with me Achim from Kuehne Nagel, who is going to be discussing the movement, really, of lithium-ion batteries from China into Europe. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Achim, and then we can take questions at the end or during. And I'm looking forward to this session. So thanks, Achim, and over to you.
My name is Achim, and I've had the pleasure of working for Kuehne Nagel for the past 22 years. And in fact, in my capacity as head of global automotive and new mobility, I'm obviously an electric vehicle aficionado and passionist. But more than that, actually, since 2016, I'm also a certified expert on lithium-ion battery transportation and warehousing. And that actually takes us straight into the topic of our discussion here today. I would like to put under the spotlight the movement of lithium-ion batteries from Asia, particularly from China, into Europe. And the objective of my presentation here today is as follows. All of you will probably know that the vast majority of lithium cell supply is coming from Asia. It used to be predominantly Japan and Korea, but with this significant pickup in EV moves, China has now taken the lead. So out of the 85% world supply from Asia, probably it's a fair statement to say that 75% is coming out of China. At the same time, there's a very, very good infrastructure now in place between Europe and Asia by rail. And in fact, the automotive products which are moving by railroad via the Trans-Siberian route or rather the southern route are automotive parts and components, CKD, SKD, but also spare parts. And I can confirm that over the past 2 months during COVID times, our volumes have increased by more than 300% on the rail tracks for automotive alone. What may be a reason for that? Well, the average transit time by sea freight from a main Chinese port going into Europe is approximately 45 days. And as you can see on the slide, the transit time within rail transportation is approximately 15 days. But in addition to that, also the carbon footprint for automotive, not for automotive, the carbon footprint for rail transportation is significantly better compared to shipping by any other mode of transportation. And eventually what has led to the spike of significant increase in automotive volumes lately is the on-time delivery reliability. Due to the high volatility in the market, due to Corona, many blank sailings, many ports have been closed. There was a high uncertainty with regards to will my cargo arrive on time or not. So we see a much higher accuracy actually in rail transportation compared to sea freight. So there is this high uncertainty. What I hear, regardless whether I travel in North America or Europe or in Asia, and I do travel to the battery hotspots of the world, people don't know whether or not they can move batteries via rail in China. And the objective here today is to clarify that and to give clear guidance about what is possible, what is not possible. And also at the last slide, and I have 7 content slides in total for you prepared, I will also give you an outlook of how we at Kuehne Nagel see the future of lithium battery transportation by rail. Prior to talking rail freight now, let's have a quick refresher over here that lithium-ion batteries are dangerous goods. And they do require very special caretaking and particular expertise from all people along the supply chain and the value chain of the lithium-ion battery. So the main takeaway from this slide is that this is a dangerous commodity. Life is at risk. Life is at risk if not treated according to regulations. And there's always the high risk of fire, spontaneous combust, explosion. And the deadly part about it is that you cannot extinguish a lithium-ion battery fire. So to transport this commodity or to store this commodity requires special and particular expertise. and that as a entry point into the later part of this presentation, because the dangerous goods component does have a significant impact on whether or not you can move the batteries by rail. So let's talk block trains now. You can see a picture on the right of a standard block train where you have a locomotive and then you have 80 wagons, 80 empty wagons behind the locomotive. And you can either put 80 40-foot containers on these wagons, or you put 160 20-foot containers on these wagons. So this is a block train. You know, you load the train in origin and you unload the train in destination, and it almost goes non-stop from A to B. And currently, there's a pretty good infrastructure in place. Only a few years ago, 5 years back, 10 years back, even people said, I don't ship by rail because there's winter in Siberia. We don't know about what's happening at the border crossing between China and Russia. We couldn't track and trace a cargo. So simply it was not an alternative. So everything moved by air freight or by sea freight, where nowadays you can also go by truck because the Silk Road has been established. However, if you ship by rail between Asia and Europe, this is actually being governed by CIM or by SGMS, where the CIM and SGMS are governing the liabilities of transportation. Similar to all other modes of transport, they are overarching transportation regulations. And CIM is more for the Western European countries, where SMGS is more relevant for the ASEAN countries. But in addition to this legislation, there's obviously the national regulations of all the countries which you are crossing along your way from Asia into Europe. Further to that, there are the rail carriers, the national rail carriers. The national rail carriers also have their own house rules, so to say. Similar to an airline, you buy an airline ticket and you come to the gate, but still the airline may refuse giving you access to the aircraft. You cannot board because you are drunk or for whatever other reason. Of course, the national rail carriers have the same rights. So they have their own house rules and can say what is allowed and what is not allowed to be shipped in my territory. Eventually, what you also need to know is that they are the so-called platform companies. The platform companies, they are all exclusively Chinese companies, and they are government influenced, if not even 100% government owned. And in every Chinese province, you have one of these platform operators. And the platform operators, and actually they are dictating and deciding with whom are they operating, which rail carrier are they operating their block train services from Asia to Europe and from Europe back to Asia. So these platform companies have a very instrumental role. And we heard on the previous webinar earlier today from Arthur that government incentives have a very high influence on the take-up rate on electric vehicles. And you know what? Why do we see the significant increase in rail transportation between Asia and Europe? That is truly driven by Chinese government subsidizing transportation between those two continents. So the platform companies do play an instrumental role in the entire supply chain. And they are the last player which you need to know, which are important when transporting goods by rail. Let's have a quick look into the Chinese railway dangerous goods transportation regulations. Actually, those regulations have been established a long time ago, and the latest revision was in 2014. Today, we are in 2020, and the infrastructure and the demand and the commodities and the frequencies which we see today is much, much increased compared to 6 years ago. So maybe this regulation is a little bit outdated. I think so. One very important appendix of that dangerous goods cargo regulation by the Chinese government is the so-called commodity name list of dangerous cargo by rail transportation. You see a copy of that on the right-hand side of the slide, the orange book. That book actually was established in 2009. And in this book, every commodity which is listed in the commodity name list of dangerous goods cargo by rail transportation is not allowed to travel on Chinese railroad tracks. So if a commodity is inside that book, you cannot move this cargo inside China, and you can also not move it by rail out of China or coming from Europe into China. And you may anticipate now what we're going to see on the next slide. The next slide is actually disclosing that lithium-ion batteries are specifically mentioned in that book. So in fact, we are differentiating between lithium-ion standalone batteries, so standard 18650 cylindrical or round cells, or we are talking about lithium-ion batteries packed in or packed with equipment, such as in laptop computers. Both commodities I mentioned are not allowed to be transported by rail. And actually, what we recommend at Kuehne Nagel is there's a constant change in regulation also in China, and it's very unpredictable to know what is happening in China tomorrow. So therefore, our Kuehne Nagel rail experts are constantly checking, weekly checking, when we get new bookings, whether or not this commodity is listed in that book, has been taken out of the book, or has been taken into the book. So the takeaway from slide number 3 or 4 of this presentation here today is that you know now that you cannot move lithium-ion batteries by rail inside China. So the question is now, how do these lithium-ion batteries arrive in Europe by rail? How is this actually possible? And prior to disclosing that, I would like to share with you that there are 2 routes from Europe into Asia and vice versa. We are differentiating between the so-called the northern route, the Trans-Siberian route, or the Silk route, the southern route, 13,000 or 10,000 kilometers respectively. And on these routes, which you can see on the bottom left of this slide, which is our own illustration, you can see that there are several different origins and destinations. And actually, there are about 10 different organizations which are offering their services, their block train services on these routes. So Kuehne Nagel, as a freight forwarder, we are then going to one of the platform carriers and national rail carriers in order to ship the cargo from A to B. So there are several services available today. What is also of interest is that there's support of Vostochny in Russia, which is about a 2-hour drive from Vladivostok, which is again very close to the Chinese border. And Vostochny port is a warm water port. It's not iced, it's operated all year round. And actually, the only way for anyone to transport batteries now into Europe is actually by either taking a container to the battery manufacturer in China, loading the container with the batteries, and trucking the container to a Chinese port, to Shanghai, for example, or to Dalian. And from this Chinese port, by sea freight, the container will travel to Russia, to the port of Vostochny. And in Vostochny, we're going to put that container on the rail in Russia, going the northern route all the way to Europe with an approximately 15 to 17 days transit time. Alternatively, what can be done is that you are picking up the lithium-ion batteries on pallets with the battery manufacturer, and you are trucking the lithium-ion batteries all the thousands and thousands of kilometers from the hotspots of cell production, again, to the Russian border. And then you are physically unloading the batteries from the truck on the ground, from the ground into a container. And then you put the container on the railroad track, and then the container is eventually traveling to Europe. And the same is obviously applicable vice versa. So on the bottom right of this slide, you can see an illustration from the shipping company Maersk, which is illustrating over here that also the containers from, for example, Korea or Japan are being shipped by short sea to the Russian before mentioned port. And from there, they are then being trucked as a combination short sea and rail into Europe. On the top right of the slide, you can see a very rough indication about transit times and costs comparing rail transportation with sea freight transportation and air freight transportation. Don't nail me down to those costs specifically, because obviously, in particular in times like now, high market volatility, air freight rates and sea freight rates are very unstable right now. But overall, it's giving you as an audience a very good indication of the increased cost compared to sea freight, or the decreased cost compared to air freight. And as I mentioned previously, the automotive industry has a high take-up rate in using rail, even though it is more expensive than sea freight today. So now that you know that there are ways and how you can actually move batteries from China to Europe, I would also like to answer and to clarify a couple of questions here. Very often when speaking to customers promoting our rail services, the KN Eurasia Express, actually we're being asked whether we have a lot of damages, because people have the sentiment that when you go on the rail, tuck, 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 that actually this is adding damage to the cargo. And the truth is that the vibration is actually less severe than in a sea ship. So we don't see that there's any issue in putting automotive products and lithium-ion batteries on the rail. And what we always do is we are taking pictures when goods are being loaded, and those pictures are then being sent to destination, just to ensure, should there be any damages, that it can be proven whether the damage happened prior to loading or happened actually during transit. And I do confirm that, speaking to some of the battery manufacturers who are using the road, we have had some difficulties by the vibration of the railroad tracks. The barcode of the cells has actually been scratched, and that resulted in a non-acceptance of some of the OEMs of that particular material. So with better packaging, this can be avoided. But overall, I would say that damages along this long journey are not an issue anymore. Further, the question about security going through so many different Eastern European countries. Well, the truth is, this is a block train. It starts here, it ends over there. And this block train is going through several different countries. So what's happening at these country borders? At these country borders, there is, of course, inspections, paperwork inspections. Goods need to be cleared for in transit, and governments are paying attention to the fact that what is supposed to travel through Belarus, for example, will actually not stay in Belarus, but actually will go through the country. So there's a very high level of security along the entire journey. And in fact, within Russia, from the very beginning you enter Russia to the very moment you're leaving Russia, armed guards are always accompanying each and every block train. In addition to that, what we are providing as additional service to our customers is GPS technology. You see a picture on the bottom, on the top right of this slide. There are multiple different sensors and trackers available. We do track, of course, shock. We track temperature, the geographic location. But of interest is also that we are checking for light detection. So should somebody actually open the container door, an alarm goes off, and then we know that somebody has tampered with the merchandise. And in order to avoid that actually people can open the containers, there are 3 safety seals, what you can see on the bottom picture of this slide, which are always being added as additional precautionary measure to all of our shipments. And the GPS services are also equipped with geofencing technology and are extremely productive and extremely efficient. You know that you have different gauge changes along the way. You know, the bandwidth of the railroad track this is referred to as the gauge. And actually, this goes back to World War I, where the military was moving their troops and their supply by rail from A to B. And in order to avoid that the enemy is actually quickly entering into another country, different countries have different widths, different gauges on how their trains travel. So in many parts of this world, in Europe, this is fully harmonized. So trains just they breeze through Europe. But that is not the case when we are looking into Asia and Europe. There are different bandwidths. And actually what is happening over here is whenever we have a change in gauge, the train needs to stop for approximately 12 hours before it can eventually continue its journey. So that was a question which I very often heard from our customers. And we have to change gauges at least twice along the route. Then eventually, summing up and coming to an end of this presentation here, what is the outlook? What is actually going to happen in the future? Is China lifting the ban of transporting, of limiting transporting batteries by rail? If there was no Corona, we in Kuehne believe that they would have already lifted it. But the truth is, a lot of lobby work needs to be done. And right now, there was simply no time to do lobby work because of the pandemic situation. So we anticipate that as early as next year, China will lift the ban on shipping batteries by rail. That is simply due to the fact because they see that they are missing out on opportunities. And remember what I said before, the platform carriers dictate what is happening, what you can and what you cannot do. And now that there are alternative modes by trucking, by road to the border, or by using sea freight and going to Russia right away, they're missing on opportunities. They're generating simply less revenue. And for that particular reason alone, I personally believe that the regulation will be lifted. Still, cargo will then travel under dangerous goods regulations, but there's not such a thing as a ban per se that, as of what we have today, where you're not allowed to ship batteries by track in China on the railroad tracks. That will probably change next year. With that, I hope I was able to clarify and to demystify a little bit how is it possible that Asian batteries from Korea, Japan, and China are arriving by rail in Europe, even though everybody knows that it's actually not allowed to move cargo by rail within China. Now you have the answer to that particular question. And having said so, Peter, I would like to hand back to you in order to answer questions which hopefully came in via the live stream.
Okay, thank you, Achim. Great presentation. One question: who will be who will drive the change within the legislation? Is that going to come to sort of forwarders like yourself, or from an automotive perspective on dangerous goods as the EV market continues to grow? Will that be a vehicle manufacturer driven or a battery manufacturer driven?
Yeah, very good question. It will certainly be driven by the battery manufacturers and by the automotive companies. I have not mentioned, I have not disclosed here on the presentation that actually certain computer products, such as laptop computers, who are also including a lithium-ion battery, they are specifically not mentioned in the book which I was referring to previously, which says, if your name is in this book, you don't get into my club. So lithium-ion batteries built in device are not allowed. However, laptop computers specifically have been excluded from that list simply because China is dominating this particular market with laptop computers. And China is also dominating the electric vehicle markets. From the 3 million EVs on our roads today, more than 1.5 million are driving in China alone. And this number, as we all know, will go through the roof. So therefore, China itself has a very strong interest to look into the regulations. And certainly this is being supported by lobbyist work, which are the big manufacturers and conglomerates. And we as a freight forwarder, I think we can contribute to telling and giving confidence to the government, telling them, don't worry, we can move it. If we are moving it based on these safety measures, everything is fine. But the Chinese have been backed up a little bit due to this catastrophic incident a couple of years ago in the port of Tianjin when things exploded, many people died. And in fact, the Chinese infrastructure inside the country is not equipped for a lot of handling of dangerous goods. So therefore, investments need to be made. But the Chinese government is anyhow making investments into rail transportation. So long story short, there are multiple lobbyist groups, but at the end of the day, it will be the Chinese government who can no longer miss out on this opportunity to ship the commodity, starting in their own country.
How far away would you say that is?
Well, as I've said previously, without Corona, we thought it happened already this year. So when you Google, okay, lithium battery transportation by rail in China, when will it be allowed? They are there are certain insiders who say they again know from insiders that it was expected already for this year. Again, we also consider ourselves an insider. We know it's not going to happen this year, but we do anticipate it next year, Peter. Whether this will be January or whether it will be December, nobody knows. This is in the hands of the Chinese government, really.
Gut feeling side? Is it more mid-year 21?
I truly would not.
I'm asking the impossible answer.
It's completely unpredictable. It's truly unpredictable. You know, China, they are changing their regulations overnight. They're making them stricter. They lose them up again. So I'm the wrong person to ask that question. It's purely guesswork, unfortunately.
Giving it really with the going by road, yes, more expensive than shipping, as you mentioned, but it's also you're saving 2/3 of the time. Given the Chinese production of vehicles and the necessity as well for producing for Europe, won't they steer it a little bit quicker?
Well, first there's road-only transportation. You can go by road from Shanghai all the way into Europe. And depending with how many drivers you are operating the vehicle, this can be done anytime between, let's say, approximately 15 days, between 15 and 20 days, single driver or double team driver. And the costs are approximately, let's say, 15 to 20,000 euros per equivalent of a 40-foot container. Trucking the goods, trucking batteries to the Russian border to then do the reloading, putting it into a container and loading it on the railroad track, personally, I would not advise. I would not advise because, as I said before, it's a dangerous commodity. It's sensitive. You don't want shock. You don't want vibration. You want to avoid short circuiting. So actually, to me personally, this never has been an option. But to load a 40-foot container at a premises in China and actually bring it to a Chinese port, to then bring it to Russia and truck it over, that is a true alternative. And from a cost perspective, we also heard from Arthur from the previous discussion that the Daimler EQC was on sale, but consumers have to wait for 9 months because people say that the OEM cannot produce the batteries fast enough. And I'm just quoting here what I read on the internet. I also can confirm that we are flying a lot of batteries from Asia into Europe, tons and tons of batteries. And why would somebody do that? Organizations are doing that because they need to get a hold of the lithium cells in order to build the battery packs, in order to put the battery pack into an EV and to sell the EV because of the 2020 CO2 emission targets which need to be met. So therefore, speed is of essence right now. And if a consumer is buying an electric vehicle today and you're missing that sale, most likely he's not going to buy a new one within the next 5 to 6 years. So there's the races on right now to bring models into the market which consumers will buy. And if they don't buy model number A from brand number A, they will go to brand number B. So the speed is on the most expensive and most critical part of the EV, and that is the battery. And therefore, we in Europe still depend on the Asian supply of lithium cells, because even though the next gigafactories will be up and running in some European countries in 2021, 2022, it will be a drop of a hot stone, a drop of water on a hot stone with regards to the capacity that will be manufactured within Europe. Personally, I believe the pipeline looks very good with regards to gigawatt capacity production, but there's still a long way to go until we can reduce the dependency. And that is again why there's so much interest and spotlight on the rail transportation between China and Europe, in particular for the batteries.
Okay. How much do you feel that this coronavirus will have impacted a slowing down of the ability to sort of put greater investment in some of the things that we've looked at today? Do you feel that the investment, sort of not just rail companies, but across the board, is going to be restricted because of what we're all sort of currently going through? Or do you think it will bounce back quicker?
Personally, I also believe it will bounce back quicker. Things are up already, up and running in China. We know that in the months of, it was April or May, the number of new vehicle sales was already exceeding the previous year's numbers. Now maybe have been hungry for a while, and this is why they couldn't buy in months. So this is why maybe this number is going to go down again a little bit over the next couple of weeks. However, nobody wants to deny Corona, obviously, but people will always want to have mobility. And we see from the German government, the English, the French government, the Chinese government that significant subsidies are given into greener transport solutions and drive electrification. So therefore, I personally do believe that there will be a very high acceleration and pickup rate, in particular on the lithium-ion batteries, whether it's for scooters, whether it's for electric bikes, or eventually for the automotive industry.
I think we're about on time anyway. So thank you very much indeed. It was a really interesting presentation and an eye opener for lots of things. So thank you again for that and putting the effort in. I also want to take the opportunity now to thank you as Kuehne Nagel as well for sponsoring the event. And for other sponsors who helped us deliver the event to everybody in volume free of charge. So a special thanks again to Unipart, Kuehne Nagel, Federal Express, Jeffco, CHEP, and Rangex for their support in putting these together. We have a couple more sessions today. And then tomorrow we will not just be looking at more of a standalone presentation. We'll be looking at panel discussions, as well as looking at certain companies that are starting up to offer additional services. Got quite a few people who have actually saying that they really have learned such a lot with what you've put in. So thanks again. Let's all just keep moving forward to a zero carbon environment, and some of the things that we've got accustomed to, like listening to the birds and all the other things in the garden, and not having all the mass pollution going on. So thanks again, Achim. Thank you for watching and supporting it. Thank you. Okay. The session will be available on catch up. And for anyone who's joining us later, I look forward to seeing you then. But thanks again, and take care. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. Stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you.